class 6, and I cannot believe how fast it went. And we are working on the river scene that I started last week, and I'm going to show just a little bit of some of the next steps for my painting. And I'm going to actually start in the background, because right now my background is very blue-green, and it does have a little bit of purple here and there, but I'm not feeling like it quite works together. And so I decided that I wanted to tone it with some burnt sienna. So I'm going to use, and this is something that you can do for your paintings, whatever painting you're doing. There may be times where some part of the painting you want to adjust, either to push it back so that it's not as in focus, or maybe that it's not the center of interest, and so you want to make it less important. And so I'm going to use a thin wash of burnt sienna, because the burnt sienna is a warm tone and slightly muted. And so when I put it over the background, it's going to tone down that cooler color, because it's a warmer color. So it's the complement of, or the opposite of, those cooler colors. And I don't have my, oh geez, it's right there on my palette. So I am going to put a little water over those bushes, because I will also add some branches in there, and that water will keep that edge softer. And I don't have to put water up there first on the very top edge, but then I just need to get the paint on there. Now at first it's going to feel very brown, but then as it starts to dry, it will just sort of blend in with the green colors and neutralize them a little bit. And I do not want this to be opaque, so I have a lot of water in my mix that's on my palette. Just a touch. And then I am going to pull out, I could have already had that done, but I'm going to pull out some Quin Magenta and a little bit of, I believe I used Cobalt to tone it just a touch. And I'm going to just use those colors again on my bushes. So I'll start with a little bit of the Quin Magenta and the burnt sienna. And I will go in this time, and well, it's a little wet still. Let's see. Basically, I'm trying to add some texture to the bushes that are back here, and maybe the look of some branches. And I will dry the back of my brush this time, because it's moving too much. So I'm looking for places that I can just add a little bit of texture and leave some of the lighter color peeking through. Okay. And that's dry right there. So I'm going to adjust some edges. The burnt sienna mix that I made, and it's also pushing a little bit of the green down right in there, so I'm just using my brush with a little bit of moisture on it to lift some of that back out. And I actually don't mind if some of this sort of disappears into the background, because it kind of pushes those bushes back as well. And then right here it was dry, so I will adjust right there, and that's dry. There's a few places where it didn't quite get enough water where it was drying. I'll re-wet. And then just coming in, add a few branches down low where it feels like it's over the snow. And then you could do this next layer either with harder edges or with some soft and some hard. So it doesn't all have to be soft edges back there, because as it comes forward, you can have a little more texture. And I probably will add a few harder branches once this starts to dry a touch more. All right, so I'm going to leave that for right now. It needs, I think, to have just a couple more hard-edged branches down in there because I wanted to have the overall feel like it's sort of blurry, lots of little branches, but I want just a little more, and right now it's just too wet to do a whole lot with. The water needs some more color under some of these rocks, and so I'm going to go and just look for anything where I can adjust a value here and there. Like that rock there is kind of lighter, and so just putting a little bit of some darker water around it will make it start to stand out. And then, where was I going? Over on this side over here, I like some of this lighter area, but I want the water under these rocks to be a touch darker, and then plus just adding a few marks in there like there's moving water can give you the feeling of what this thing is. And so I will soften a couple of those edges here and there just to make them blur and blend in with the water. And then I'm going to go into, I'm going to make kind of a burgundy-ish color and use a little bit of my Cobalt to darken that, make sort of a muted, darker purple. I'm going back into this area to make some harder edges. My burnt sienna still has a lot of water in it from earlier, so I need to dry the back of my brush. So I'm still using those three colors for just these different parts, and I don't always, I'm not someone who says I'm going to do a painting and only use these three colors. I am fine with adding some variety and picking something that works well for wherever you're working, but then you have to make sure that you're using that elsewhere in your painting.
Is that Cobalt or ultramarine?
This is Cobalt,
Okay.
but I was just wanting to pull out some ultramarine because the Cobalt cannot go as dark as the ultramarine can. So they are somewhat similar in their look, except that Cobalt is a lot deeper in tone and it's slightly purpler. Yeah. And it depends on what brand you're using as well, because different brands are going to look different. So, all right. I am going to go back to the water for a few minutes, and depending on the how involved you want your water to be, you could focus on doing parts of the water for a really long time because they can get very detailed. So don't, with something like this, because it's a smaller painting, don't feel like you have to put every mark in. But if you're interested in doing that, there's no reason that you should necessarily just get focused on just a couple marks. So if you feel like you want to add more in there, I think I'm actually going to I'm going to use a touch of water just so that there's some blurry edges here and there. I will make a gray-y brown using the ultramarine and burnt sienna. And then I'm going to add just a touch of my Quin magenta to it, and I will dry the back of my brush because I don't want this to move too much. And then right in through here, I am using that darker color to give a little bit of texture. And I'm trying not to lose all of that gold because I like that gold that's in there. I wanted just a touch more because that second layer adds a little bit more depth to the scene. And also when this mask comes off for this rock, having some darker areas next to it can help give it that value change that you need to make the lights look lighter. Also, these marks that I just did here, sometimes putting a mark in the direction that the water is flowing can really help make it feel like it's water that's moving. All right, I'm going to get some darker color, and I'm starting to look for those rocks that are deeper in color, in value. Not color, but value. Okay, right there. And then this rock is going to go dark. More on, so on the front right, and I'm using it a little more purple right in here. And I have a lighter edge back there that I think I'm going to use just pure burnt sienna. See if I can get that back there. I should have started with that really if I was going to go with that, just because it's easier than trying to, but sometimes you don't always see it. Okay, so that might still have to go darker because it may dry too close to the value of the water around it. But I'm okay with just building these things a little bit at a time and coming back and doing another layer. And then in here, there are some rocks that are in the water, and they are dark and light. So there's some areas where the water is flowing over them, and I'm seeing lighter areas as well. And then this rock right here, I added some mask to the top of it to make it snowy, but it is, it's almost green. I don't have my Quin Gold out. I'm going to get some of the Quin Gold out because I like some of the variety that added. So, okay. A little more burnt sienna. So I don't have a ton of paint out right now. Some of it is just because I'm working on little areas at a time, and so I can go and adjust and get more pigment as I need it. And I'm not also working really dark right now. All right, a little more burnt or ultramarine. So the Quin Gold that I added to that basically sort of just neutralized that mix and made it a little grayish. And then I just, taking your brush sometimes and just touching to the bottom, it releases color off the brush and you can darken an area. So that was still wet enough that I could do that. Let's see, there's a rock. I need more ultramarine. There's a rock right down in here. And I should have, I probably would do this in 2 passes if I were painting this not during a class. But it's okay, I think, if those edges sort of blur together a little bit. All right, and then there's, I'm going to use a little bit of burnt sienna and my Quin Gold for right down in here because there's some areas that feel a little warmer. And plus it just adds some interest to, makes it feel like the water is sort of over the top of the golden rocks. And so I was talking last week about adding a layer to a rock in order to give it form. And so I'm going to do that with burnt sienna and my ultramarine. And back here, this guy can go a little darker. And I'm using it on the right side, lower right side. Same thing here. I'm going to add a little bit of, so my brush is sort of just all mixed in right now because these are rocks and they can have sort of more muted tones. They don't have to be pure colors. And then same thing down here. I will use dark green here. And then this area right here is where the water is coming up right next to the rock. And so I will use some clear water right here and then come next to the paint that I just put on and just touch it so that it can blur into that white water a little better. Tone that corner just a touch. All right, so I'm going to go back up here and do this evergreen that's back there, but I need to dry right there right quick, and then I can do that area. I did not dry the whole area, so I'm not going to be doing anything with that right now. Hopefully later on I'll go ahead and move that mask off of there so you can see these branches, just so I can show you one part of one of those. And so I think I'm going to use for these trees a variety of mix between ultramarine and Quin Gold, and possibly a touch of burnt sienna with it. And that will give me an olivey color and still keep it sort of on the muted side since the sun is not really bright. All right, Quin Gold. And this will be the first pass on these, so it may be a touch lighter than what it will end up being. And maybe a little golder in places. And again, I could paint over where the trunk will end up being, but it just helps remind me that that's where I want to place it. There are a couple smaller trees in front of the bigger one that's back here, so I'm going to paint negatively around those smaller trees so that right now I'm just painting the bigger one. And if you have an area where you're changing it so that it's a little bluer, like I changed that so that it's just a little bluer. Same thing here, I'm making it a little bluer because those little trees in front then can be a little warmer and they'll separate. Just a touch there, maybe right in there. It's like the big tree is hugging the little trees. Okay. And those guys still being in the background don't need to be really perfect edges or in focus or any of that. I kind of feel like I want just a couple branches, maybe right there. All right, and this area of the snow, because I've got color in around it, I'm not worried about really protecting it anymore. I'm going to go ahead and remove that because this tape has got just enough color on it that it can affect how you're viewing your image. I'm going to do just a touch more down here and then I'll let you guys go paint. I want to, when you come back for the second time, I'll do a little bit on the snow and maybe one of the branches because you've seen some of the other things now. So I just want to kind of give you a little bit of information everywhere. So the water that's down here, right now I have that first coat on and I want to change it so that it starts to have a little more form. So I'm using Cobalt with a touch of burnt sienna, and I am looking for places that are darker than the value that I already have there. And I want to also leave some of my whites. So be careful that, or my lighter colors, be careful that you're not taking everything too dark. So like right there, just that little bit of additional value starts to give it a little more form. And then over, and this is slightly purpler mixed because I had a little bit of purple on my palette. So I'll make that a little darker. And a touch over in here so that it mixes together. And then the there is a rock right in here, but I didn't put that in, so I'm going to ignore that. You know, it's one of those things, you're the artist, you can move mountains and put trees in where they're not. And okay, because I want this to feel a little like it's got hard and soft edges, whoops, some yellow on the brush. I am going to wet down into here, and this brush is not going to hold a whole lot of water because it's small. And then a little more brown. I still want it to feel like it's on the grayer side of things. Make sure that we're even there. And then as I'm coming down in through here, I want to add just a touch more. All right, so I think I will stop there, and then while you guys are painting, I may put in the darker rock here so that I can take off this masked area so we can see that, and I may put in two smaller trees, but I will come around and we'll do some more in a little bit. I put in well, first of all, I went in and put a few of the branches back in here on these bushes because I wanted to remove the mask here, and it was easier to leave the mask while I was painting some of those branches. I did not put any branches here yet because this is not in the way of that, so I thought I'd just do a couple right quick, and these are Quin Magenta and the Burnt Sienna, and you can do it with a big brush like this and put branches in that are a little heavier, but if you want to get down to finer branches, there it is, my script brush that has the longer bristles that are very flexible is a way that you can create branches that feel a little more natural. And I don't know if I showed you guys, but again, you come up on the end of it and it's a sort of a flicking type of motion, and you're trying to get branches that will feel sort of natural. Yeah. So I'll put just...
That's not a rigger though, right?
It's called a script. I think, yeah, they're pretty much the same.
And you know, I think some of the things I was calling riggers are called liners.
Oh, sure, they're all
Yeah, and I think the idea is pretty much the same. Some may have a little more brush or bristles to them so that they hold more, or they might be a little longer. Yeah, but basically, and I want to put just enough on here that it feels like when the viewer comes up and looks, there's something interesting there for them to see, without overdoing it. And if it feels like it's a little too in focus, once you've got them on there, I don't know that I would use this round particularly, but instead of pulling something else out, you can come back and just with some clear water just soften here and there, and sometimes just hitting it with a little bit of clear water without necessarily trying to get it really soft focus, but that will blur parts of it, and then it won't feel as too in focus back here. All right, so I have that in. Before I do this, there is some snow here and some snow back in that area that I want to put a little bit of color on. And I pulled out Cobalt and Cerulean and Quin Rose. And it's a little kind of purple toward in here. And then I'm starting to see just a few touches of blue in a couple places as it comes toward me. And so I'm going to use, I'll start with Cobalt with a touch of the Quin Rose and more blue than the red in that mix, so it's a cooler purple. And I'm going to just kind of go back and find places of the snow back in here that I can go. They don't have to be, in fact, I don't want them to be too perfectly horizontal. I want to give a little bit of movement to the shadow that I'm creating on this one side so that it feels like it's going over kind of bumpy snow. And there's some back in here. And then this snow right here, there is a harder edge, but because it's farther back, I think I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of water on that edge so that it doesn't read too hard-edged farther back. Right now these are hard-edged and I can go back in and blur a part of their edges if I want to. So I'm just looking for the shadows that are a little, or that are easier to see right now. And that's kind of dark. Just lift just a touch. And will help me give form to, I don't know. Oh, and that's really, this is hard to see up there on the TV right now. So,
Very much so.
yeah. Let's see. It's not you guys, it's me. It sounds like someone breaking up with someone. It's not you, it's me.
It's us.
All right. And just trying to define some of those edges, and I'll turn this around here in just a second so you can see it better, because yeah, if it's not viewable, I think it'll be okay in the video, but on the screen it's not so great. And so I'm going back and forth between the cerulean and the cobalt and the purple. So there's a little variety happening. And just getting color in the snow.
And this is Quin Rose instead of magenta.
Yes,
right? Okay.
because the magenta is going to be too strong and a little more neutral than the rose.
Okay.
You could use the magenta very thinly, but they are in the same family, and so I'm just going to make it easier on myself and go right to the rose rather than using the magenta. All right, and so anywhere I feel like there's a little shadow, and it's on mostly the left and bottom of these snow patches. All right, I will turn this around. Actually, before I turn it around, let me put a little bit, I want just a little on this bank of snow, and I think I'll use just kind of straight cerulean back up in here so that before I paint that branch in, I've already got that lighter tone there, because if I go to put the branch in and I haven't put that on, then I can accidentally pull some of that branch color down into the snow, which I don't want. Let me dry that and I'll turn it around. So the just adding a little bit of shadow or blues to parts of your snow, all of a sudden it starts to have form, and there's not a whole lot needed in this image because it is not really sunlight. Now that I have some of the snow there, I'm going to do one branch here, and then I'll show you a little bit on this snow before. I actually might go down to this rock down here because I did talk about this one being a little, it's very round feeling to me right now, and it's in the corner and all of that. So I may put some of the snow on first to see how that affects it, but then I may have to make an adjustment to this area so that that doesn't feel like a big round
Circle out.
circle
Yeah.
blob or
Big snow blob.
potato or
Get stuck
whatever.
there.
Yeah, exactly. So I am going to,
Yeah.
I think I'm going to use the magenta and maybe the ultramarine with just a tiny touch of burnt sienna in it. And so I want to get more magenta out. And because these are lit at the top of their form, I will be using, I actually may just paint them on hard edged. I'll show you two ways that you can do it, but sometimes the first way that I will do it, sometimes it rolls too much, the color moves, and then you kind of lose that. So I'll show you both ways, and then you can decide which way you want to do
What
it.
blue did you say you were going to use?
Ultramarine,
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, and my colors are not very wet. The only one that was a little wetter is the magenta. Not that it needs to be one way or another, but right now I am not necessarily wanting to go put them in. I don't think I turned mine off. I was going to, and then, okay.
Oh, that's her.
No, it's me. It's my phone. So the first branch here, I will paint on wet and wet. And to get a branch that has a lighter top to it, you put the water on. This is going to be a little big. Let's see if I have. Right. It's kind of like I need one in between those two because it's not.
I'm surprised you don't have one.
I know. The lower part of this branch is not really lit, so I don't need water there. I did put snow on my branches, so the part for me that would start to be lit is up in here. And then any place it branches off, you can just run water up that branch and you don't have to think about it. So anytime you're doing a branch that has smaller branches off of it, if you want to just focus on the bigger branch, use water to help you avoid having to go up those branches. I think I'll try it with this one. So then I'm going to use the ultramarine to tone my my Quin magenta so that it's a little more, I'll show you up here. So it's a little more purpley, exactly. That technical term of purpley. So here's magenta by itself.
Yeah.
With the ultramarine, it's a little bluer. And then I'm going to take that mix, which is still on my brush, and add just a touch of the burnt sienna to it. And then I can vary it throughout. So if I decide, oh, I want it a little bluer here, something like that, I can adjust as I go. So this had no water. I don't know if that water on the other part of the branch is still going to be there. I want to go a little browner though in places, and I'm painting around the snow. If you feel like you're going to have a hard time painting around any snow you might have left on the branches, you could remask that. And I am going back more into the burnt sienna, and I like that a little better. So there's not, yeah, it's already dried. Okay, so I will get some water. So what it should happen, yes they do. I'm going to add more water. So what happens, because I'm putting the water on the upper part of it, when I put the color on this branch on the lower half, some of that will move into the upper part of the branch and create a kind of rounded feel because it's going from the sort of darker paint that I'm putting on the lower part, and it will blur, or should blur, up into the lighter area. Yeah. It should move. We'll see if I get an area here that it actually works. It may just be drying a little too fast for me right now. Okay, so when that happens, you just keep going, and then you can come back when you want to use a smaller brush and not have it be too wet, and just catch that upper edge, and you want to do it kind of quick so that you can see if you can get any of that paint to sort of blur along that edge. And it did a little bit. It's got a softer edge, so it's not got a hard edge, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. Now I can still go back, and if I decide that that branch is not quite dark enough, or I want another layer of color or something, I can still go back as long as I'm using a smaller brush that's not going to hold a lot of water and cause it to push water into the area that's drying. You can still go back and adjust it. So that darker value helps separate it from the bushes and the background a little more. So the other way to do it would be the way that you just come in. Let's see if we do this branch right here. This branch is a smaller branch, and I can literally just paint it on and leave a white upper edge. Then you can either let the paint dry. I'm talking bizarrely. Let the paint dry, or do like I just did on this branch, and you could come back with a little bit of water before this is completely dry, and just put some water along that edge, and some of your paint might soften or move a little bit. But because I'm using a smaller brush, not putting as much water and paint on there, the whole thing is not going to move that much. Now if you put it on, it's got a hard edge, you let it dry completely, that would be where maybe you come back at some point and just soften it with a little bit of water so that it feels like it's blurring. So in general, branches and rounded things, wherever there's a highlight side, you can use water, or you can use lighter paint and then come in with darker paint next to it to cause it to round. All right, so I would continue doing those guys, and then the snow that's in here will need to have just a touch of shadow on it as well, so it's not too flat. But I'm going to go into the snow down here right quick, and because I want this hill that's right there to feel a little farther back, I'm going to place a little ink on the brush. So I'm placing a little bit of water back in here, and I'm ignoring these branches because these guys are going to be dark later. And then I will take a touch of, I'm using the cerulean and a little bit of the rose, Quin Rose, in there, and then a touch more right up in there so I can separate those two hills just a touch. Now this guy has a lot of white, and part of that is because when I took the photo I did not have the snow metered right, so it blew out the snow and made it just white and lost a lot of the shadow. So in order to...
What is a snow meter?
It just changes it so when you're looking at the snow, you're not causing it to, because your camera is going to see it as really white, and it doesn't, you may not have the camera set right for it to get the...
Don't have to worry about that with a phone.
Yeah, exactly. You just take it. So I have wet that area, and it's not wet completely, so it's kind of randomly wet. So I will get both hard and soft edges. So what I'm putting on is just to give it some form to the snow. And it really is just kind of random. And I don't want it to lose all of its whiteness, because I think that's part of what makes this scene pop. Okay. And then down, oh, actually right in here, that is the, oops, I'm grabbing just any color that I can find at this moment. All right, rather than thinking about it. Okay, so this area right in here is the more in shadow side of the snow, and it's got a little bit of some water in there, and then I am painting it on the dry paper. And this is darker for sure. But don't, if you feel like you're not wanting to push it this dark that quick, you can go a little slower and build it. But I feel like I kind of know I want it that value because it's going to dry 20 to 30% lighter.
Yeah.
So, and then the thing that will help that not feel so blue is going to be these darks that go in around it. And there is some shadow. I want to go darker here as well.
Now that has water on it.
It had a little bit.
Okay.
It is lighter than that.
Okay.
Yeah. There was a touch of water on a couple of the edges because I can see where it's blurring just a little.
Okay.
And then kind of right in here. There is a little bit of gray in parts of this snow where it is hitting the water and it's icier. So if you see those grayer parts, and I went and used my Cobalt and a touch of the burnt Sienna for that same gray that I used down here in the water. And you can add a little gray to those areas because that's where it's a little icier. So if you see that, and over in here for that, we were talking about that branch that's hanging with the snow on it over right in here. That area is also where I might use some of the gray. So, or if it's down close to the water and it feels like it's sort of icy. Let me do one little area right here and then I will dry it and put some darks in right there. And then I will be done for now. Okay. So right in here, there is a little bit of a hill and a dark area. Get some of that. Little purple. Oh, right in here I'm seeing it pretty strongly shadowed. Okay. So I'm going to dry right here and then I will come back and do just a touch with the darker color in that area too. Okay. When you are doing an area of your painting and you've used a dryer or you're wanting to paint some area around it, just make sure it's dry by touching it. If it feels cool to the touch, I know most of you guys know that, but just for general knowledge, you should just check it. And generally I try to touch with the back of my hand. I don't always remember to do it because if you have lotion on your hand or anything that could cause your paper to get something on it that can make it so you can't paint on it is...
And that's ultramarine and burnt sienna?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I am just looking, and there are places on the bank there that there's actually some grasses that are yellowy that are hanging down kind of in here-ish, and I don't want it that vibrant. So by coming in, there's some right in here as well. I think I'm going to go a touch browner.
It's very tricky.
Yeah, just want it to be sort of there, but not be too strong, because if that's really yellow, it's going to just stand out too much. And then over here is a shadowed area. And so just coming in and finding some of those shadows underneath the edges of the snow as it comes next to the water. Mm-hmm. That shadow is a really important thing to make it separate from the water and give you that edge. And it also makes this area not feel as blue because I've now got a darker value in there. Touch right in here. So that would be, I would just kind of keep looking at it and see if there's anything that I want to add
That pops up
Right in
the
there.
white, that's for sure.
Yeah. That is decent enough around this area that I can go ahead and put in a couple of these branches because they will also make it so that it feels like, oops, that's a little wide. Feels like the snow is not as dark, the shadows, by putting those in. So if that had happened, well, it did happen. If that had happened, it really did happen. So I will leave that and let that dry because then once it's dry, I can come back and just soften some of that dark out of there and it won't matter. So there are a couple other branches in there, but I won't worry about them right now. I want to go down here because right now, this white water is not separating. It doesn't look as white because this value that's right next to it is not dark enough. So I'm going to use a little bit of my Quin Gold and the Burnt Sienna, and I am painting on dry paper because I can always go back and soften that edge a little if I want to. And I have to watch the value here. I either have to go darker than this rock or keep it a little lighter. I'm actually going to take a little blue on my brush and go darker back in here so that that rock will separate. So now this water starts to make sense a little more because I've given it that edge. So it's just sometimes little things like that that you have to just, especially as you're starting to finish a painting, get back from it and go, okay, I'll look back and forth between my image and my painting and just kind of decide, is it working, is it not, what do I need to adjust. Here, this rock right now feels like it's floating. It feels like it's on the surface of the water, and so it needs a shadow. So I'm going to use my ultramarine and my Quin Magenta, maybe a touch of Burnt Sienna in it, and I can leave some of the lighter color sort of peeking through. I think I need to go a little darker. And then by putting that on there, now all of a sudden that rock is not cut out. Okay. The last thing I will do is this corner, and I will not necessarily get it to finish, but I just kind of wanted you to see where I would start. So right now I have the darks in because I had this masked, and generally I would want to paint the lighter things, but I was painting around it and it just made it easier to paint the water and all of that. So then once you remove the mask, sometimes it is kind of like, oh, that's kind of bizarre. So one of the things that I think I want to do is take some water and by softening an edge of my mask in a couple places, it sort of causes the mask to be less hard edged. Well, it is causing the mask to be less hard edged and I can change the shape of it. So if I want this mask to feel sort of like it's maybe dripping or starting to melt, right in here, you can just lift, depending on your colors below. So you can lift edges, and let me see what else. I think I want it to blur up in here so that this is not as hard edged. I know right in here that I don't want that piece that's peeking out here as strong. And I think because this is still sort of round, how do I want to do it? I think I want to maybe adjust this edge. Because I have all this white right here, I can change how that's looking. So I'm going to use Burnt Sienna and my ultramarine, and I don't know if this is another rock or if this is the same rock that I am just adjusting. I don't know that it matters because no one's gonna see my image. So already that's a little better. Yeah, it does. Kind of has a heart-like shape. I could have some rock come in right in here. Maybe I want some rock right there.
Yeah, getting rid of some of that white.
And so I think, and then you could have little openings here and there that the white is not, the snow is not solid. So I could put a couple right here maybe. Okay, so better. Then back, I need to dry that before I could do the snow itself. So I'm going to dry this and then I'll put a little bit of color on that snow. And I have not removed the mask from some of these rocks yet because I may still want to do a touch more in places in the water. And some of that would be maybe a reflection where I've got this dark now. In the water itself, I might have a little bit of some reflective color from that darker line. I actually feel like that's a little too dark though. I don't want it as dark as my color that's on the shore. Okay, so here I'm going to use that same wet and wet, which this has got a little color on it. It is what it is. All right, and I will use the cerulean, and I'm going to let it be a little dry brushy right in there, kind of like that texture. And then as I come around, I'm going to pick areas, and I did not wet over into here, so now I have to decide, okay, do I want those hard edges or do I want to go soft? And if you want some soft edges, that's just come in with a little bit of water and let it blur. And I think I'm going to put some shadow. This is a mix of the cerulean and cobalt. Actually, this is really wet right now. Take some of that out. I tend to like a lot of cerulean in my snow. I think it picks up the sky color. And, oh come on, I don't think I had anything. And maybe just really get some color along there. So all of this right now is hard edged, and probably what I would do before painting any more snow, and I probably will go back and soften some of those edges, but to make them feel a little less important, because this dark and this light next to each other can pull your eye. So if you want to cause those edges to be like I said, less important and not as strong, just coming in and softening that darker edge, even if you don't soften the whole thing but parts of it, it can make a difference right here. And the other thing is, because we're making this up over here, I might decide, you know, I think most of this is going to be in shadow. Maybe there's something causing a shadow right down there. So I can just come in and throw some blue, and I even could put it over the rock. All right, come on. Down in here as well to darken that corner.
Oh, yeah.
So those things don't, sometimes you have to push your painting a little farther. Like, I don't mind the light up in here, but I don't necessarily like it right here. So I'm going to do like I said and soften some of these edges just a little bit. And this is a flat brush that it's not really a scrubber, but it works well. And a little more cerulean. and then just push this so that it's darker. And I might leave just a little bit of some lighter whites in there. I don't like that edge right there. Poor edge. Okay. So now, right now, this edge is really strong and so is that one. So I would probably soften those, but I'll probably leave them white. And then I left some mask in this corner. So this is going to go purple down here, but I will have to soften that edge as well. And I think the one thing that I will probably need to do is that right now the water and the snow edge are a little too close in value. So I need to come back in and pick out a few places that will make that edge, make the snow come forward and push the water back in that area. So, yeah, and it back and forth. So usually it's a values thing. Something needs to be adjusted, or something needs to be less important, something more important. And then once I get, right now, because this doesn't have any snow on it, once I pull that off and start adding some snow to this, then this won't be as strong because I'll have some more darks and lights in there. But yeah, I think it's working like that. So. Okay, so I will leave it and let you guys go paint.
Lorraine, can I just ask, you know that the light coming just in the kind of goldish brown right before the waterfall that you...
Right in here.
Did you pull that, or was that mask already, that nice little... yeah, right there. Was that mask, or did you just pull that light in?
I do have little pieces of mask here, and
right.
then right in here, I did this wet and wet, and so I left some of it a little highlighted.
Okay.
So if you feel like yours has gone a little too far the other way, then I would say pull a little bit. You can lift some highlights. Okay. And that'll make it glow a little more. Okay. And that's one thing, like right in here, I feel like it's not quite... it needs to have just a little bit of some of this pulled back, just a touch, where maybe the snow is reflecting, or so you can use a brush, either a stiffer bristle or a flat brush, depending on the mask, or I mean the paint, depending on how easy it is to lift, and just pulling some highlights out of there can give it the feeling of moving water.
Okay.
Yeah, so that kind of thing. And then I did leave, like these guys, those marks are places where I had it masked, and I would go in once I'd removed the mask and take a soft brush or a scrubber brush and adjust those edges so that they blend into the water. They're not too hot.